Welcome to How You Livin', a transformative podcast featuring best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and minister, Dr. Rick Rigsby. And now, Dr. Rick.
Hello, friends. Thanks so much for listening. As we begin this new year, 2025, I could not think of a better subject to discuss than the greatest lesson I have ever learned in my entire life. As many of you who listen to these podcasts regularly know, the basis for these episodes, they're rooted in a third grade dropout. The wisest man I ever met in my life, my father, Roger Rigsby. He taught me a lot of lessons. He taught me to not judge people. He taught me that it is more profitable to be an hour early than a minute late, that I'm to be kind to people. I can hear him saying, son, kind deeds are never lost. He told me to make sure that my servant's towel is bigger than my ego, and that if I'm going to do a job, I ought to do it the correct way. I ought to do it the right way. I can hear him saying, son, how you do anything is how you do everything, that it's never wrong to do the right thing, that good enough isn't good enough if it can be better, and better isn't good enough if it can be best. Those were great lessons, but the greatest, the absolute greatest lesson he would teach me on the worst day of my life. And I think this is a great reminder for all of us to simply and unequivocally keep standing, to not quit, to not give up, but to just stand. Just a bit of background. It was in 1974 that I met Trina Williams, a nursing student at California State University, Chico. That's where I went to college in Northern California. To save several paragraphs, let me just say that somehow I had a great day and swept her off her feet. 4 years later, we're standing at the altar about to be married. We would have a couple of children, 2 little boys, Jeremiah and Andrew. Trina was a labor and delivery nurse at a nearby hospital. I was on my first step toward being a network television correspondent. I was a television reporter at Channel 12 in Chico, California, KHSL TV. Our lives resembled a fairy tale. Can you imagine? She's a nurse. I'm a TV reporter. 2 great children. Life is great. We're living in Northern California. We're just a couple of hours from Mount Shasta, a couple of hours from Mount Lassen, a couple of hours from the Pacific Ocean. We're at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. We're just a couple of hours from skiing Lake Tahoe. We literally had the world at our fingers until the day that Trina found a lump in her left breast. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and 6 years later, me and my 2 little boys were standing in front of Mama's casket. That was nearly 30 years ago, and at age 40, my world would never be the same. The world of my 2 sons would never be the same. And I can remember very vividly standing in that funeral home in front of that casket, and I just felt like giving up. I turned to my father, the wisest man I'd ever met. He'd been my pillar my entire life. And I don't know what I was expecting, but what he shared with me would forever change my life. I simply turned to him and I said, Dad, I've lost hope. And my dad said, son, you can't lose something God gave you. You haven't lost hope. You've lost perspective. Now, son, just stand. Just stand. I never would have thought that a short time later, I would start going all over the world, encouraging people from every walk of life to keep standing. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would find love again. As a matter of fact, I remember right before Trina died, she said the most unselfish thing a wife or a husband could ever say. She said, Ricky, my babies need a mommy, and you need a wife. You're not built to be alone. And I really believe with all my heart, I cannot prove this theologically, but I believe it with all my heart that Trina helped God to handpick Janet. And Janet's first assignment as my new wife was to adopt our little boys. And then we would later have more children. But all of that began in front of a casket when a 3rd grade dropout daddy challenged me the way that I had never been challenged before. You see, I wanted to quit. I wonder who I'm talking to right now. I wanted to give up. I wanted to throw in the towel. All I could see in front of me was loss, devastation, despair, discouragement, disappointment. Am I talking to anybody out there? Let me encourage you with this simple bit of advice. If all you see is what you see, you don't see all there is that needs to be seen. So sometimes we don't need anything earth-shattering. We just need a slight adjustment to change our perspective, to change our perception of things, because it's our perception that literally informs our reality. My father simply stated, son, you can't lose something God gave you. You haven't lost hope. You've simply lost your perspective. In other words, if you can keep standing, son, if you can keep standing, friend, you'll regain perspective. You know what I discovered over the years? That as long as you have breath in your body, you've got hope. Man, I hope that encourages someone. As long as you're breathing, you still have hope. Might not feel like you have hope. I get it. You might not think you have hope. I get it. But just because you don't see hope doesn't mean that hope doesn't exist and reside inside of you. I remember once Helen Keller made a very powerful statement. She said, you know what the tragedy is? The tragedy isn't a person who's blind. The tragedy is a person who can see but has no vision. If all you see is what you see, you don't see all there is that needs to be seen. So the greatest lesson that I was taught on the worst day of my life was to keep standing, to just stand. The greatest lesson. May I encourage you as we begin 2025 to keep standing regardless of how you feel and despite what you see. I want you to keep standing. Friends, I happen to be recording this podcast during the week that we celebrate the birthday of civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. His life, his public life, from age 26 in Montgomery, Alabama, to the day he died, April 4th, 1968, shortly after 6 o'clock as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, Memphis, Tennessee. His entire adult life can be summed up in one word: stand. And by standing, that one man encouraged many to stand for the fight for civil rights. You see, friends, standing is birthed out of a conviction that cannot be purchased, cannot be rented, cannot be bartered. Often that conviction is produced by an exigence. What is an exigence? I'm glad you asked. An exigence is an imperfection marked by urgency. So racism, an exigence. Sexism, an exigence. Mental illness, an exigence. Once again, an exigence, an imperfection marked by an urgency. The exigence can be personal, it can be corporate, it can be societal in the case of Martin King and what he was facing. My dear, dear friend and spiritual father, Bishop Joseph Garlington, has often said that leaders are cornered. Trust me when I tell you, after studying Martin Luther King and his rhetorical positions, after studying his rhetoric, after studying in detail the Montgomery bus boycott, after doing my dissertation focusing on Birmingham, 1963 as a critical turning point of the civil rights movement, I can clearly, unequivocally say that Martin King was cornered. Great leaders aren't just born. Often they're responding to an exigence. They're cornered. I want to talk a little bit as we not only initiate the beginning of the new year, as we not only celebrate the birthday of Martin King, but perhaps even as a tribute to Black History Month that really doesn't celebrate just Black history. It celebrates all those interested in the progression of democracy. I want to talk a little bit about how Martin King stood and how the power of standing will so encourage so many others around you to stand. That's right. Standing, simply standing. It's provocative. It's contagious. It is influential. One man standing transformed the United States of America and maintains his place in the world. So would you stay with me for a couple more episodes as we talk about standing? Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Until we meet again, this is Dr. Rick, reminding you of the most important question I can ask. How you living?
Are you ready to make an impact in your world right now? Do you want to stop existing and start living your best life right now? Dr. Rick wants to give you the first chapter of his best-selling book, Lessons from a Third Grade Dropout, absolutely free. Just go to www.rickrigsby.com/free gift to get the print or audiobook right now.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.